Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and tonight I'm going to be talking to you about a holy book which, for all intents and purposes, looks and reads like a book of the Bible, a prophetic book, a scriptural book, but has not made it into the mainstream Bible for the most part, and is not accepted even by rabbinical Judaism for the most part. So it can be considered an apocryphal book, but it is a very interesting book that tells the story of the fall of a number of angels and some hidden mysteries to do with that, and also a prophet who gets a brief mention in Genesis but had a very interesting life and contributed a lot to later Jewish and Christian mysticism. I'm talking, of course, about the Book of Enoch, specifically 1 Enoch. There is a 2 and a 3 Enoch, but for the purposes of this video, the Book of Enoch is referring to 1 Enoch. This is a really fascinating book, and as I've said before, it's apocryphal. It's scripture, but it has not made it into the Jewish Bible or the Christian Bible for the most part. There is an exception to that rule, and that is for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Book of Enoch is considered canon and appears in their Bible, in that really cool-looking Ethiopian script. The most complete manuscript of the Book of Enoch in existence today comes from the Ethiopian version of that book. And of course, the Ethiopian church is one of the oldest Christian churches in the world, in history. And there is another fascinating community originating in Ethiopia, which also refers to the Book of Enoch as a sacred scripture, and that is the Beta Israel community, who actually claim to be descended from one of the lost 10 tribes of Israel who got exiled by the Babylonians and eventually migrated down into Ethiopia. They claim to be descended from the tribe of Dan, and that has actually been accepted by many mainstream rabbinical authorities. So the lost 10 tribes of Israel and how they're resurfacing in our time is another fascinating topic, but I'll leave that for another time. Let's get back to the Book of Enoch. So in addition to being accepted by at least one denomination of Christians, the Book of Enoch is referred to in the Christian Bible, in the New Testament book of Jude, as something that the early Christians were familiar with and referred to. In addition, the Book of Enoch was one of the books that was uncovered as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found near the Qumran community, a community from the 2 centuries preceding Christ's ministry, which seems to have had a lot of influence on, at the very least, John the Baptist. I've talked about that in previous videos. Or at least parts of 1 Enoch would have been known by that community, because the Book of Enoch is actually several books. It's at least 5 books, and all compiled together. Some of those were written later than others. But that first book, the Book of the Watchers, certainly was familiar to the Qumran community. And the Book of Enoch has influenced the evolution of Jewish Merkabah mysticism, and has also had an influence on the emergence of the later Kabbalah. And it particularly deals with the concept of ascent to the throne of God, ascent in the spirit to the heavenly realms, or perhaps physically in Enoch's case. And we see this mirrored in many later forms of mysticism that came out of the Jewish world. Okay, so as I've already said, the Book of Enoch, that is to say 1 Enoch, is actually a compilation of books, of 5 books. The earliest of those was probably written around the 300s BC. The latest was probably around 100s BC, but at some point they were compiled together. And what the theme of, or the plot of 1 Enoch is it follows the deeds of the prophet Enoch, and the kind of knowledge that he became privy to due to his journeying into the heavens to talk with the angels, and also with his interaction with a group of fallen angels known as the Watchers, who were active in the world in that time. They were in fact the reason for the human race becoming wicked in pre-flood times, and God then bringing the deluge as a result of that. And Enoch was in fact the great-grandfather of Noah. And this is something which is covered in the genealogy in the book of Genesis. So we are introduced to the plot of the book of Enoch in the very first book, which is the Book of the Watchers. The Book of the Watchers tells the story of the fall of a group of angels known as the Watchers. This is not the fall of Lucifer and the angels that followed Lucifer, which seems to have happened before the events of Genesis, at least in the Garden of Eden. But it is a separate group of angels that have fallen in the narrative of Enoch. These angels are known as the Watchers. As the name suggests, they were tasked with watching over humanity in the pre-flood times, and they fell in love with the beauty of mortal women and wanted to make those women their wives. And this is something which is referred to in the Genesis account as well. But the Book of Enoch really expands upon the brief mention of the sons of God and the daughters of men, and really turns it into a story. So there was a prominent angel, the leader of the Watchers, known as Semyaza, who suggested that all of the Watchers should take an oath that if they go down together, basically, and that they need to follow through with their plan to make the daughters of the human race into their wives, so to speak. And so they do this, and then the angels follow Semyaza and go down to earth, and they have relations with human women. And the result of these relations is a hybrid race of giants known as the Nephilim. And the Nephilim begin to tyrannize the human race and oppress the human race. Just not a good situation at all. But in addition to evil and wickedness and corruption spreading through this means, there is another way that they tamper with the human race, which leads to much wickedness. And that is by sharing certain types of knowledge with the human race. So another prominent angel and leader of the fallen angels that were the Watchers is an angel by the name of Azazel. And Azazel is credited with a number of types of knowledge that were shared with the human race. For one thing, Azazel is credited with teaching human beings the knowledge of metals and using that knowledge to forge the first weapons of war. And in addition to that, Azazel gave human women the knowledge of cosmetics, of makeup, gave knowledge concerning jewelry, again related to the knowledge of metals, and the implication being that this knowledge was used to seduce and manipulate men. There was warfare, there was violence, there was seduction, but there were also other forms of knowledge that certain angels delivered to the human race, which is seen to be a negative influence on the human race from the point of view of the Book of Enoch. So Semyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Another angel called Amaros taught the resolving of enchantments. And there were other angels who taught astrology or other forms of divination, such as looking for signs in the clouds or in the earth or in the sun and the moon. So of course, this caused a lot of trouble in terms of what God's plan was for the human race. And so God was preparing to declare judgment, not only on the Watchers, but also on the human race, which had become completely wicked and corrupt by this point. And so the holy ones, which are, the angels that had not fallen, were sent by God to the prophet Enoch, and they gave Enoch the instruction to go to the watchers and proclaim judgment upon them. Enoch does this and then finds that the watchers are somewhat remorseful, and the watchers ask Enoch to intercede on their behalf, to go back to God and pray to God that they might be forgiven for what they have done to the earth. And Enoch does this, but God is not willing to forego the punishment that is going to be dealt out against the watchers. So at this point in the narrative, what are commonly accepted as the four archangels take a very important role in the plot. That is Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. Michael defeats Semyaza and imprisons Semyaza. Raphael imprisons Azazel in a pit in the desert, and Uriel is tasked with contacting Enoch's great-grandson Noah to warn Noah of the coming flood that is going to exact judgment on the human race, which is where the kind of Genesis story picks up. And the Book of Enoch describes the judgment of several other of the fallen angels and gives many of the names of these fallen angels. And of course, God also destroys the Nephilim. But Enoch is not only given the task of being a go-between between the watchers and the holy ones, he's also taken up into heaven and given visions of multiple different realms. The realms of hellish judgment that are reserved for the fallen watchers, as well as heavenly realms as well. And there's kind of like a contrast between the sort of corrupting knowledge that the watchers give to humanity and the knowledge that the holy ones, the angels loyal to God, give to Enoch. Because they give him a lot of knowledge about the movement of planetary bodies, which is to do with understanding the order and precision of God's creation, looking to the stars for that reason, rather than looking to them as kind of lesser beings that control fate and foregoing God's plan for humanity. And Enoch is given a lot of knowledge as well about the history of the human race that's dealt with after the Book of Watchers in some of the later books of 1 Enoch. So he's shown the fiery pit where the watchers are imprisoned, as well as the 7 angels who govern the cosmos. And it's very interesting here because, of course, in the Enochian magical system, which borrows a lot of the mythology of Enoch from the Old Testament, there are also 7 angels which form the basis of that system, and a 7-fold division of the governance of the cosmos by various angelic beings. But that's another digression, and comparing what is said in the Book of Enoch to what is the basis of Enochian magic is another video again. I'll leave that for another time. And the judgments that the watchers are to receive in the last days are described to Enoch and revealed to Enoch. But so too is the judgment that will face humanity in the future. And this is dealt with in the second book of 1 Enoch, the Book of Parables, which is quite possibly one of the later additions to the material in 1 Enoch. And there are a lot of other apocalyptic concepts which make an appearance in the Book of Parables. One of them is the coming of the Son of Man, and another is the future reign of the Messiah. And of course, those two things are very related. And in fact, there is a theory, which I think is quite plausible, that the concept of the Son of Man in the Book of Daniel actually came from the Book of Enoch originally, and then made its way into the Book of Daniel from there, which would be a huge contribution to the development of Jewish and Christian apocalypticism. And it's just a wonder that the Book of Enoch hasn't made it into the Bible for that reason alone. And there are other familiar apocalyptic themes dealt with in the Book of Parables, such as the redemption of the righteous Gentiles in the last days, the redemption of Israel, and the resurrection of the dead. Another interesting thing that makes its way into the apocalyptic narrative of the Book of Enoch is the story of Behemoth and Leviathan. There is only one other place in the Bible where Behemoth and Leviathan are described at least by name, and that is in the book of Job. These are two massive beasts. Think about King Kong or Godzilla. One of them, Behemoth, dwells upon the land, and the other, Leviathan, is a sea serpent that dwells within the sea. And both in the book of Job and in the book of Enoch, God demonstrates his power over both land and sea by subjecting these massive, monstrous beasts to his will and ultimately defeating them in 1 Enoch. They are created at the beginning of time. They are so massive that they create destruction and must be sealed up for a time. And then in the last days they are released, only to be struck down by God, according to the apocalyptic narrative of the Book of Enoch. Now, here's an interesting connection that most people don't make. The two beasts of the book of Revelation are in fact references to Behemoth and Leviathan. There is, of course, the beast that comes from the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns, and there is a second beast that follows it, which comes up from out of the earth with 2 horns like a lamb, but which speaks as a dragon. And this, I think there's quite a compelling case to say this is a direct reference to Behemoth and Leviathan. And in the book of Revelation, those 2 monstrous beasts are being kind of reinvented or reinterpreted as representing, rather than the land and the sea in a literal sense, kind of like the seas of the polity of the people of great nations, in this case the political entity of the Roman Empire, which united many people, and the earth being a reference to the land of Israel, as is often referred to as the earth in Scripture, and specifically the kind of corrupt religious authority that has sprung forth from that by colluding with the Roman imperial state. With a beast from the earth representing some kind of religious authority, whether that's the corrupt kind of priesthood of the Second Temple, or whether it is a representation of the Roman imperial cult, deifying the emperor, which is kind of like the religious wing of the beast system. But these 2 symbols find their origin point in Job, and importantly for our purposes, in 1 Enoch. The third book in the book of 1 Enoch is the astronomical book, full of many astronomical secrets for the most part, which I'm not going to go into because it's quite tedious. It's the movement of heavenly bodies, as you might expect. But there is another interesting kind of verse that appears in the astronomical book, which is in chapter 81, verse 2, whereby Enoch is given an opportunity to look at some heavenly tablets, and that verse reads, "And I observed the heavenly tablets, and read everything which was written thereon, and understood everything, and read the book of all the deeds of mankind, and of all the children of flesh, that shall be upon the earth to the remotest generations. And forthwith I blessed the great Lord King of glory forever, in that he has made all the works of the world." So again, as a little taster for one of my future videos linking the Book of Enoch to Enochian magic, this is precisely what the Gebethel ritual was supposed to do. It was supposed to give the magicians access to the same heavenly tablets that Enoch had seen, and to give the magician access to that very knowledge, and reveal it again to humanity. Much the same way as in modern day theosophy we might think of visiting the Akashic records. It's a similar kind of concept. The fourth book in 1 Enoch is the Book of Dream Visions. This is a series of, again, apocalyptic visions, and what they are really is parables or metaphors for the history of Israel up until the Maccabean revolt, and then following the Maccabean revolt it deals with prophecies of the final redemption. And in particular, there is one prophecy which describes a series of different animals in different colors representing different nations and powers and peoples throughout history. But it's very telling that the history of Israel ends at the Maccabean revolt and then proceeds to the final redemption. I think that it is telling as to what kind of historical period at least this part of the Book of Enoch was composed in, that it didn't make any mention of the Roman Empire or anything that went after that, that the apocalyptic expectations of Judea at that time was very much centered around the events of that time. Much the same as the Book of Daniel was in its original interpretation, before many of the symbols got reinterpreted to be referring to the Roman Empire rather than the Seleucid Empire that the Maccabean revolt rose up against. The fifth and final book of 1 Enoch that I'm going to mention tonight is the Epistle of Enoch, which is again an apocalyptic text, a prophetic text. And what the Epistle of Enoch is most well known for is the now fairly famous prophecy of the 10 weeks, whereby the history of the world is divided into a series of 10 weeks, prophetic weeks, of course, and each of those weeks represents a period of 700 years. It covers the history of the world from Adam all the way to the world to come, and the world where the millennial kingdom is established and there's a new Jerusalem and all of that sort of thing. The prophecy of the 10 weeks is a very fascinating prophecy, and one of the things that makes it most interesting, as far as I'm concerned, is given the time period that we have for the writing of the Book of Enoch, and that it couldn't be, the latest portions of it couldn't be later than about 100 BC, it seems to predict a lot of things in the future to do with the coming of Christ, the destruction of the Second Temple, some of the kind of holy wars of the later period of the Crusades, and even some other mystical events, perhaps even portents of the Age of the Enlightenment. It's a very interesting prophecy, and I may actually do a video just on the prophecy of the 10 weeks in future. But that is the end of what is in 1 Enoch. As I've said before, there is a 2 Enoch and a 3 Enoch. They do kind of add to the kind of legend of Enoch as given in apocryphal or pseudepigraphical texts. Notably in 3 Enoch we see the story of Enoch being transformed into the angel Metatron. But again, if I do cover that, it'll be in another video. I think I've given quite enough information on the most well-known Book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, and some of the interesting things that are revealed by that book about the prophet Enoch, his life, what he got up to, and the story of the fallen angels known as the Watchers, and what happened leading up to the Great Flood that we're told about in Genesis, and the kind of knowledge that was given to humanity by the Watchers, but also to humanity by Enoch after he learnt it from communing with the holy ones in heaven and looking at the holy tables in heaven. So a lot of food for thought. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like down below, subscribe to this channel to support my work, and if you want to support me further, hit join all thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.